And I'm curious, I know you and I spoke a little bit before we started the podcast about your experience going to business school and being an entrepreneur. And it sounded like you were saying that there is a certain frame of mind or just an attitude that comes with going through that sort of training and creating this skill set, that it can be amazing to have that creative exploration and building something, but it can also sounded like it could be really complicated when it comes to feeling successful or feeling like, you have to work so hard, you have to work yourself into the ground in order to be successful. It's a very particular kind of mentality. I'm just wondering from that experience, like what has that meant to you? And now that you've been going through this process of growth and healing and shifting your perspective, like how do you look at yourself now as an entrepreneur, or even thinking about, there's just kind of maybe thinking about, there was one way to look at, success. Has it changed now?
Absolutely.
That you're evolving?
Yes, dramatically. I think my idea of success before was, the pretty typical answer of power, suits, stages, and money. And until I achieved those things, it was work as hard as you can, as much as you can, as fast as possible. It almost cost me a lot in my life going down that path. And I had a really hard time redefining what success meant to me because my ego was so attached to the power, the stages, the suits, and the money. I felt like those things I was only worthy if I had those things. I didn't think I was worthy of love from anyone or love from myself unless I had those things. Or if I was working every day, day in, day out, around the clock to achieve those things. And I could tell you all the things that I'm doing. It's like I prided myself on being busy. If I wasn't busy, then who was I? And I think there are a lot of hustle cultures throughout the country, and San Francisco is definitely one of them. And I think when you say you're an entrepreneur in San Francisco, or anywhere in the country, it means different things. In certain states, it means you own a hardware store. In San Francisco, it means that you've raised $2.2 million. In DC, it means that you have a government contracting. It just means different things everywhere. And I think what I had to learn is it doesn't matter where I live. What does it mean to me? And so I don't really identify as an entrepreneur as much anymore. I really identify more as a creator and more of an innovator, because I can innovate and create within an organization, and I can innovate and create outside of an organization. I think what stresses me out is trying to create a consistent revenue model. I know how to do it, but I don't think I'm willing to put in the work that it takes to make it consistent. And that's been a really tough pill for me to swallow. I know how to do it. I know how to do it with my eyes closed, but I'm not willing to do the work anymore. To do it, I really just enjoy creating for the sake of creating. And, if something's meant to happen with it, then I'm happy, but I'm on a slow burn. I'm on a slow, long, like I'm training for the marathon now. I'm not running the 5K or the mile as fast as I can. I'm thinking the next 40 years. I'm thinking legacy. I'm thinking very long term. So I guess the suits and the stages and the money and the power really don't impress me anymore as much as they did before. I care more about who you are as a person. What do you do for fun? Where are you from? What are you reading? What are you creating? What's your passion? How are you contributing to society? What kind of world problems are you solving? That's kind of more my focus these days.
Sounds like you're empowered as you speak about it as well. It does, because, and I don't want to at all diminish what you've shared, but I do want to comment that from what I hear kind of around the world, but in the pockets where I hang out, this is something that this is like becoming a pattern, maybe even a trend around the world. This idea of the only way to succeed is to work harder, more, faster, longer. Like that is something that I think it's a value system that somehow it's always been there, but the more, the supersize, the more seems to be what's valued even more. And it's like, is that true? Is that based on truth? And that's what I hear you saying anyways, or at least that's the spirit of what I hear you saying is I had to look at that. And as I'm growing and developing and evolving myself, no, that's not something I have to identify with in the way that I did. It's not a part of your value system in the same way is what I was feeling in your words. And that, to me, that's so empowering because it's like, I hear you saying, I know I can be successful. It doesn't have to look that way. And so there's freedom in that, in my mind.
A lot of freedom. It's my husband told me for many years before I actually got this, he's like, it's not about what you can do. It's like, what do you want to do now? You've proven that you can do so many things. And I don't know that I would change anything. And that's what's hard about it, because I think a lot about like, how can I help people avoid these things? But I don't think you can. I think you have to go through your own journey and your own process to get to this place of wisdom. You have to earn it. Whatever that journey looks like for you is your prerogative. And some people, I mean, you can just tell people who have had experiences and have this wisdom about them, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for them the whole time. And those are the people that we turn to the most for advice. And those are the people that are role modeling ways of being in the world. But yeah, I mean, I guess it is very empowering. It's about doing what I want to do and not what I have to do anymore. And that's such a blessing, because I didn't come from an environment where my mom didn't have that choice. My mom still doesn't have that choice. And there are plenty of people in this country that don't have a choice. Plenty of people in this country that would listen to what we're talking about right now and think we're out of our mind because they are in survival mode. They don't have time to think about what to do and if they want to be called an entrepreneur or creator. They're thinking about how they're going to get the next meal on the table and how to, juggle cleaning their house and grocery shopping and someone watching their kids while they go work a second job. They're not thinking about how to be in this world. They're surviving. And I think it's difficult. I think what makes that, going back to that conversation of growing, I think it makes it really difficult to grow when you have been surrounded by a lot of survivalists. Because for me, it feels like I'm leaving people behind. It feels like there's a little bit of guilt in that. Like I'm leaving people behind, but I've had to teach myself over time that everybody's on their own journey and I got to keep going so I can come full circle and contribute to the solution in a larger way rather than helping someone individually. Most of the people that are in survival mode aren't coming into therapy. They're not thinking about, they're not reading self-help books. They're in survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, you're the most impulsive, most reactive, probably most angry. For a lot of people, it's troubling. It's troubling because they need the most help. But a lot of our services aren't helping that community.
Yes. And what I hope and aim to do with this podcast is one little teeny tiny contribution is for those who are listening who may have taken the time to listen or watch the video, is to promote the idea that everybody has capacity. Now, everybody's capacity is different, but we all have the capacity to grow and we have the ability to evolve, even in ways that don't have anything to do with being an entrepreneur.
Right.
It's about what, in our conversation, you're sharing about where you came from, some of your experiences that were keeping you in survival mode in an earlier stage of your life, and then the awareness and the, willingness to work through them. But it's talking about that journey and, like you're saying, kind of modeling it can be done. It doesn't, you don't have your journey, your, purpose in life doesn't have to look like mine, like Justine's, like anyone else's. It's about the evolution, the change. That's what I really think is the most important to promote, and to have all different kinds of people who look different, who are from different backgrounds saying this, and that's what I hope this space offers people. Is I'm hearing all kinds of different people talk about change and progress and in their personal lives and in their communities. And it's recognizing, or I guess coming to a place of understanding that, that is possible. You don't need $1 million to make that happen. You virtually don't need any money to make, or any extra money to make that happen, but support of, and resources and tools of some kind. Your book is one of those resources, I think are necessary. It's very rare, I think, that a human just wakes up and says, I am stepping outside of my circumstances. There has to be a process typically that people and steps people take. There are, I'm sure, those exceptional people who don't go through that journey. But yeah, that's really what I hope to promote here. And I think that all that you've shared is illustrating that and demonstrating. It's really about the mindset, the belief, about myself and what I didn't want anymore and what I, wanted. And that really that's not really material, It's in my humble opinion, that's not about the material world, really. Right. No. Although we live in a material world, we do have to have material means. But so that's why I think I'm very touched by what you shared. And I just also want to say, Justine, you have a stability in your voice and in your energy, which isn't that way for everybody who, is in the middle of their process of overcoming. Sometimes there is a little bit of anxiety and for good reason. This is not about judgment. It's just an observation. You have a very stable presence. And as I hear you saying that, you are training and on the path to becoming a licensed therapist, I think, wow, you're really going to bring so much to the people you're working with. And I'm curious, of course, you're welcome. I'm curious what it is that when you think about your future self as, I know you're already a counselor, but when you think about the next steps, or even now in being a counselor, what is it that you want for people? What is it that you really want to offer people or help people understand about their journey, even if they don't ever even work with you, just even people listening? What are the things that you want people to think about who are taking the steps to overcome?
I think I want to normalize the challenges. Like I said, I don't think that there is anybody that's wise and full of wisdom that hasn't faced these challenges or similar challenges. And I think they're a gift. And I know that sounds crazy, but I wouldn't be here on this podcast if I didn't have my challenges. I wouldn't have written a book. I wouldn't have probably started businesses. I wouldn't be in the field that I'm in now. I wouldn't be going back to school for a second master's, which is insane. And I don't know what I'm thinking. I wouldn't be doing any of this stuff. And it's given me purpose. And not everybody has to find purpose in their challenges as far as their career. But I do think that finding purpose in your challenges is extremely important to overcoming them. You got to find whatever works for you, whatever that means, and how that challenge intertwines into the story that you're creating for yourself, this life that you're designing for yourself. I think a lot of the things and titles that I mentioned about myself and my identity and who I am are very taboo. We're talking about mental health a lot more today, but we're not talking about alcoholics and addicts. We're not talking about living with bipolar, schizophrenia, or borderline personality disorder. We're talking a lot about depression and anxiety. We're not talking about PTSD. We're not talking about abuse. We're starting to talk about boundaries, but we're not talking about assertive communication versus aggressive communication. We're not talking about these things. But I think out of all that, I think the reason why I am going back to school and kind of upping the ante from being, I don't want to say just a substance abuse counselor, but the reason why I want to practice outside of addiction is because the people that I really want to work with are people like me who have a severe mental illness and addiction. They typically go hand in hand because the addiction is the way you self-medicate before you even know you have a mental illness. You self-medicate because you feel differently. I can go on and on about the symptoms of certain things. This isn't a mental health podcast, but the point being is that it's important for me to get that clinical mental health counseling expertise so then I can work with severe mental illness and shine a light on it, because it's actually not frightening. We're not bad people. The word crazy is overused, and trauma is the root of a lot of it. A lot of it is genetic, but trauma triggers that gene. Just because you have the gene doesn't mean that gene is activated. And so, I have thoughts of becoming a trauma therapist and really like going the whole 9 yards. But believe it or not, I hope to own my own practice eventually. And that's full circle to entrepreneurship, because I've committed to working in the field for the next 10 years to learn the different areas of the field. But I think by the time I'm 50, I'll probably go out on my own and keep a small caseload for myself and start to slow down a little bit. But the point being is that I think there's a lot of people out here suffering from a lot more than what we're talking about. I mean, severe mental illness, severe addiction. People don't know that addiction is a disease. They think it's a choice, a moral choice. They don't know that it's a disease and that the brain has been taken over. There's just a lot of education that needs to happen. And I think because I'm working in the field and I'm so open about my own challenges, I think there are more books in me with writing about my experiences and bringing that professional language to it and kind of reaching professionals and reaching people like us. I think there's a way to build community around that, because I also think a lot of mental health professionals don't have that personal experience and just see it as very textbook and don't see it as a human being like Justine. People meet me and they're like, wait, you have what? Wait, you're an alcoholic? Oh, you're too pretty to be an alcoholic. These things that people say is ridiculous, but it just feeds into all of those stereotypes. Oh, I didn't know you were crazy like that. It's just people make the most, but that just shows that people have a stereotype of what it looks like to be sick in the brain. We're very aware of what it looks to be physically sick, but we don't understand what it looks like to be literally sick in the brain, because we can't see it. So that's interesting to me. That's my journey. I don't know. We'll see. Follow up with me in 40 years. Hopefully we stay in touch.
I'd like that very much. And yes, I will follow up, hopefully sooner than 40. Yeah. But yes, I'm cheering you on, certainly.
It'll be interesting to look back on this and see what all this mumbo jumbo that's coming out of my mouth, where I'm at with it at that time,
Oh, yes. There's been a lot of clarity in what you're saying. And I want to touch on something that you talked about at the beginning and use that to round out the conversation. You mentioned very briefly, as you were giving the highlights of your experience and what your work and your service in the military. And you did speak about that experience, favorably, and you have high regard for the experience. But you did mention something about silence. Silence had been a part of your childhood, being silenced or not speaking up. And then it sounded like you had said that you did experience that, or that is maybe part of the culture, if I understood what you were saying in terms of the military service. And I was just wondering, maybe if you could briefly touch on that or expand on that, but also then talk about how people are living, whether they're have military background or not, but the idea of silence and how that can be something that people are experiencing likely around the world, but this idea of not feeling that they have a voice. I'm just wondering if you could connect those dots. If does it make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very, believe it or not, a simple answer. I think what I learned and what awareness came to me, and I don't know how or when this happened, but it was right before I started writing my book, or in the very early stages. And I realized, and this is where shame comes, I had spent my whole life being silent about certain things. And I realized that it was fear. It was fear of being judged. It was fear of someone not believing me. You know, why would I report a sexual assault? Oh my God, what if they don't believe me? You know, then what will they think? It's fear. It's fear. And that's why the cover of my book is actually me ripping off duct tape. I'm ripping off duct tape. And it really only means something to me. A lot of people don't understand the concept of it. They're just like, cool cover, that's it, you know, cool story. But it means a lot to me because it's me ripping off the duct tape, and I'm in this like crazy, amazing photograph experience, but I'm dripping wet and this rain is pouring, you know, and my hair's all wet and I'm just ripping this duct tape off. And it's really about like, I will not be silent anymore. I will not protect the abuser any longer. I will not suffer in silence anymore. And I think that's very empowering and goes hand in hand with what your podcast stands for. Instead of being silent in shame and being small, I'm really going to open up and I'm going to share, and you might not like it, but I'm going to shine while I share, and I'm going to expand, and I'm going to take up space. And it was scary. You know, I did it in pieces, and then I kind of came out the floodgates pretty hard, but I don't know. For me, it always comes back to, well, this is the truth. And I go to bed every night knowing that, like, this is the truth. You know, this is who I am. I'm not going to tailor who I am to make you feel more comfortable, because I'm more important. And I don't say that to be selfish. I say that in a self-care way. Like, how I feel about myself is more important than how you feel about me. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you did. Very articulately and poetically. And I appreciate all that you've offered in this conversation. And I wanted to ask, any final thoughts or insights or words of wisdom that you wanted to share before we wrap up, Justine?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the person that may be listening to this that is still carrying a lot of shame. Like, what do they need to hear? And I've tried to tailor my conversation to that person. So if you are listening, just know that I talk to you this entire time, directly to you. And I guess the advice or the last words I'd like to leave you with are permission granted. I mean, I hate to be so like plugging my book, but it's really like permission granted to own your story. You know, no matter how colorful it is, you know, you have to own it. And if I can own all the crazy mess with me and all the labels, you know, you can own it, and you don't have to tell people the way I'm telling people. You can just own it within yourself. And so when you start to feel that shame about being a person of color or a person with curly hair or having, I don't know, tattoos in a room full of people in suits, like whatever it is, whatever you are feeling shameful about, just pause and just remember that this is who you are, and you don't need to apologize for it. And if, you know, there's trauma connected to that, it's not going to be so easy. It's going to create anxiety and panic. And my advice to that would be to seek professional help and deal with the panic and the anxiety and the depression first. Because once you address those things, the other stuff will come.
So powerful words. And thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your beautiful words, your powerful and poignant experiences, and your spirit. And no doubt anyone listening or watching will come away with having some sort of more clarity or insight, about the world and about themselves and about those around them. Mm-hmm. So thank you for all of the service in all the ways that you have offered and will continue to offer humanity. And I always ask my guests at the end, Justine, and I'll ask you now, which television show, new or old, do you recommend and why?
So I couldn't think of anything. And the first two things that came to mind, I actually was a little embarrassed about. And then I was like, Justine, this is a podcast about shame. You wrote a book about shame. You're just going to have to tell the truth. Okay. So I don't know that I would recommend it. It's just the show that I enjoy. I think it's because of the field I'm in, but shows like Quarters in My 600-Pound Life really intrigue me. And I think that kind of ties into what I said, what I want to contribute in the future, this podcast. It kind of actually brings it full circle because they are living their lives very differently. And they are feeling so much shame. And so many people spend every day watching that show, judging them. And I watch that show and I feel nothing but compassion for them. And I'm very aware of the process that they're going through and the challenges. And they're growing just as much as anybody else in recovery. I think it's something that, again, we're not talking about. We're not talking about hoarding as a mental illness and overeating and obesity as a mental illness. Overeaters Anonymous has been around for decades. We're not connecting the dots between Overeaters Anonymous and obesity. We just think obesity is a choice. We're not really connecting the dots. It's all addiction. It's all self-medication. It's all numbing some form of trauma and rewiring the brain. So those are the shows. They're kind of probably not as fun as some of the answers you've probably gotten, but that's all I got. That's me.
And it is welcomed. I never anticipate anything in particular. I'm always curious. So thank you for, adding two shows that haven't been mentioned, but they have a value for so many different reasons. So someone watching it, hopefully, people won't judge, but can certainly.
People are judging. It's fine. It's normal. It's because it's shock value.
Oh, sure. I guess I'm saying, as I'm speaking now, I'm saying, please don't judge. But if you do watch, but that's interesting. Those are interesting shows. I haven't heard about them in a while. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you again, Justine. I really appreciate your time and your energy and your contribution to this conversation today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed it.
Likewise.